All the viewers held their breath as Seth Meyers, late-night favorite and satirist with ironclad composure, tore the mask off television titan Stephen Colbert live on air. What was supposed to be a routine appearance on The Late Show for some banter and promotion of Meyers' new special turned into an unprecedented public clash. The host of Late Night couldn't take it anymore, and he laid it all bare. The cameras captured the moment when the game ended, and the truth began. The audience froze. Twitter, now X, exploded. Even Jimmy Kimmel, usually detached from such conflicts, couldn't stay silent. If you thought you knew Stephen Colbert, think again. Because this scene became a point of no return for the world of late-night television. The studio buzzed with laughter, applause echoing off the walls, and Seth, in his usual navy blue suit, smiled as he responded to Colbert's jabs about his recent late-night episodes. The CBS studio was familiar territory, polished floors, the hum of equipment, distant sounds of New York streets seeping through thick walls. But tonight, there was a tension in the air, like the calm before a storm. Seth had known Colbert for years, back from their days working on comedy sketches, and though their friendship was genuine, Stephen had a knack for throwing sharp jokes that teetered between friendly and cutting. The first few minutes of the show went smoothly. Seth shared stories about his time at Saturday Night Live, recounted a funny anecdote about his 3-year-old son spilling juice on a script, and even cracked a joke about a recent Washington political scandal that had dominated headlines. The audience laughed. Colbert picked up on his quips, adding his own, and everything seemed perfect. The rhythm of the show was like a well-rehearsed dance. But when the conversation turned to the competitive world of late-night shows, the air grew heavy. Colbert leaned forward, his eyes glinting, and said with a barely concealed smirk, "Seth, you're doing great work, but people often talk about me or Kimmel when they think of late night. What's it like always being a step behind, like you're trying to catch up with us?" The audience burst into laughter, but it was uneven, as if they sensed the joke had struck something deeper. Seth felt his cheeks flush but forced a smile, responding, "Well, Stephen, I'm just happy to keep pace while you guys are putting on a Broadway show." The crowd laughed again, but Seth felt a quiet anger mixed with shame simmering in his chest. Colbert's words had hit his sorest spot, the feeling he'd buried for years, that he'd never be the top dog, always in someone's shadow. Colbert, sensing he'd struck a nerve, didn't let up. Leaning back in his chair, tapping his pen on the desk, he continued with a tone that seemed like a jest. "Seth, your political jokes are something, but for some reason, when people talk about satire, they mention Jon Stewart or, well, me. Doesn't it bug you that your name's always somewhere down the list?" The audience laughed again, but this time it was more restrained, as if they felt a line had been crossed. Seth's fingers tightened on the armrests of his chair, his heart pounding. He knew the cameras were catching every twitch, every hint of weakness, and that tomorrow's tabloids would dissect this moment to the bone. He could have fired back with something sharp about Colbert's occasional over-the-top theatrics or mentioned that late night's ratings held steady against other shows. But that would mean losing in the eyes of an audience expecting poise and humor. Instead, he took a deep breath and said, "Stephen, I'm just happy doing a show my viewers love. Not everyone gets to be center stage. Some of us keep the lights on." The audience applauded, but Seth could hear the tremor in his voice and knew Colbert noticed it. Stephen's gaze was friendly, but there was a faint condescension, as if he'd just won a round in a game Seth hadn't wanted to play. The conversation shifted to other topics. Seth talked about a new segment on his show where he reads viewer letters, shared a story about his writing team's impromptu stand-up session in the studio. But the tension lingered. Every joke now took effort. Every smile felt like a mask. Seth imagined tomorrow's X posts screaming, "Colbert crushes Meyers," or "Seth can't handle the heat." Yet he stayed on stage, head held high, answering questions about his charity projects and tossing out a few zingers about political gaffes that the audience eagerly lapped up. Colbert, sensing the mounting tension, decided to land one more jab. "Seth," he said, sipping his coffee, "have you ever thought about switching things up? Doing something big like Kimmel or me so people finally say, 'Oh, Seth Meyers isn't just another host?'" It was a direct hit wrapped in a joke, and the audience went quiet, waiting for a response. Seth felt his throat tighten as years of comparisons, media critiques, and the nagging sense that he'd never be the guy in late night flashed through his mind. He could have walked off, but that would have been defeat. Instead, he forced a smile, leaned closer to Colbert, and said, "Stephen, I love my show as it is. Maybe I'm not making blockbusters, but I know my viewers come back every night, and that, is enough." The audience erupted in applause, and for a moment Seth felt relief, but Colbert's words still buzzed in his head like a swarm of bees. The segment wrapped, and Colbert gave him a pat on the shoulder, saying, "Great job, buddy." But Seth sensed something patronizing in the gesture, like he was being consoled after a loss. The cameras cut, but Seth didn't rush to leave the studio. He stayed seated in the guest chair, watching the now empty audience seats as technicians began clearing equipment, the smell of cleaning solution mingling with the faint coffee scent. Seth sat silently for a few seconds, watching the audience file out, some animatedly discussing what they'd heard, others glancing back as if expecting another surprise. His heart pounded in his chest with the same intensity as when he first stepped onto the Saturday Night Live stage. But this wasn't fear. It was rage. Suddenly, he stood. Not abruptly, but slowly, deliberately, as if rising not just from the chair but from years of pent-up silence. He grabbed the microphone still on the desk before any technician could take it and stepped forward to the edge of the stage. The audience, halfway to the exits, froze. "Hold on," Seth said, his voice not shouting but cutting through the silence like a blade. "Aren't you ashamed?" Several people turned, looking confused at one another. "Seriously, you just clapped for someone humiliating another person. You laughed when I was publicly diminished. You enjoyed a show where friendly jabs became weapons." There were no tears in his voice, just raw, burning hurt that had simmered for years. "I love satire. Humor is my craft. But there's a line where humor turns into cruelty. And tonight, right here, you all witnessed it, and not one of you flinched. Are you so used to someone being the punching bag for your amusement?" The audience wasn't laughing anymore. Some looked down, others clapped hesitantly, unsure if they were supporting or apologizing. Seth continued, "I'm not perfect. My show isn't perfect. But I work honestly every day, not for applause, but for the people who seek truth and good irony, not self-absorbed theatrics. If you want meaning in late-night TV, learn to tell humor from humiliation." He set the microphone down, not throwing it, but placing it deliberately, and walked off the stage without looking back. In the silence that followed, someone whispered, "He's right." Within hours, the internet exploded. Headlines screamed, "Seth Meyers takes down humiliation culture and wins. Truth bomb on Colbert's show. Audience divided. Who's the real host here?" Seth wasn't seeking victory, but for the first time in a long while, he felt not in someone else's shadow but in his own light. The next day, X was ablaze. A subreddit, number justice, for Seth popped up instantly, dissecting every frame. X users posted with hashtag #StandWithMyers, racking up millions of views. People recalled other Colbert episodes where he'd been high-handed with guests. The public mood shifted. The once beloved darling of the intellectual crowd was now under fire. Variety ran a piece titled, "The Real Show Wasn't Colbert's. It was the guy who walked off." The New York Times noted, "Myers said what others have felt for years. Late-night TV has become a toxic race for likes and dominance." Then, unexpectedly, Jimmy Kimmel joined the fray. On his own show, Kimmel stepped out without his usual jokes. "I don't like meddling in other people's shows," he said. "But last night, I saw a colleague I deeply respect, Seth Meyers, call out what's become normal, humiliation for ratings. And I stand with him, because that wasn't just brave, it was necessary." The audience gave a standing ovation. Colbert, meanwhile, tried to respond. The next night, he took the stage with a slightly nervous smile. "Guess I got carried away that night. If Seth took it as an insult, I'm sorry," he said. But viewers saw it not as an apology but as damage control. In the days that followed, Colbert's ratings dipped, while Seth's soared. His speech from the show hit over 40 million views on YouTube. Politicians, comedians, even office workers quoted him, seeing in Seth their own struggles, those who are diminished while quietly doing their work. He walked out of the studio with dignity and returned a hero. And now everyone knew Seth Meyers wasn't just a host. He was a voice of truth in the era of spectacle.